We're running out of time because Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, is going to soon be hitting consoles, and I cannot wait to dive into this game as a huge fan of the Crash Bandicoot franchise. And thankfully, I can spend a little bit of time, and I promise I won't do too many more time puns after this, talking to Lou Studdert from the Toys for Bob team, a producer on Crash Bandicoot 4. Lou, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and honestly, bring on the time puns. Just keep them coming.
I feel like you and the team must be sick of. I'm sure you do them, back and forth to each other all the time. But I feel like I must drive you crazy by just throwing them in. So I'll try to restrain myself.
We've got a lot of dad joke energy on the game, so
Perfect.
It works.
That's how I like to describe most of the videos I do, as dad joke energy. So I appreciate that.
Perfect. Yeah.
So this will go very well. But no, there's a ton to talk about with Crash Bandicoot 4, especially since last time we spoke. But the first thing I want to talk about, around Gamescom is, of course, the debut and the first look at the Flashback Tapes when it comes to Crash Bandicoot 4. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what people can expect from what that is?
Yeah, so the Flashback Tapes are these kind of devious test chambers that we've dreamed up, and they see kind of Crash and Coco before the events of the original Crash Bandicoot. So these actually take place in the 90s. They take place when Cortex was doing tests on Crash and Coco, because originally Crash was kind of planned to be Cortex's kind of general of his army. And so what we wanted to do was make these fun, crazy test chambers where Cortex is putting Crash and Coco kind of to the limits of platforming skill. And so these are these really fun, extremely difficult challenge rooms that players can get access to in a very unique way. You're required to find these VHS tapes in the levels, and you need to reach them in the level without dying. So it's actually us playing off of the death routes from the original trilogy, which required players to get to a certain location without dying to get access to it. And so for us, these VHS tapes are that challenge. So you need to find them in a level without dying to get access to these crazy levels. And then once you're in the levels themselves, they actually have kind of a multi-tiered relic system. And so for the completionists out there, it's not enough to reach the end of it. Similar to a normal level, you need to also break all of the crates. And so it's exceedingly difficult. It's really fun. And it actually allowed us to just kind of come up with just insane creative usage for all of the boxes and crates in the game, and even toss in some that you've never seen before.
Yeah, I was, watching the footage before we spoke. And one, I got to say, I love just how many Nitro crates there are apparent. I respect that. I can already imagine how frustrating I might feel on occasion at a missed jump or two, but how exciting it's going to be to try to overcome these levels. I do like that mix of the old and the new, because as you were saying, these take place back in time, but we're seeing, for example, one of the newer crates, which has that sort of like time countdown. Was there any worry about including some of the newer facets in these earlier things, or because sort of the way they're explained in the world, it was easy to kind of bridge that gap?
You're exactly right. One of the things that you'll actually see in the levels themselves, or hear in the levels themselves, is a commentary running from Cortex talking to Crash or Coco, depending on whose level it is. And he'll explain, some of the ideas he had behind these crates, or, some of the new ones we've added were actually experiments that he was running. And so we've kind of taken a chance to use these test chambers as fun areas to inject bits of lore and just kind of that Crash humor that you know and love, as well as recontextualizing or contextualizing different things about Crash's past.
Well, and I really love that sort of whole ethos for the game, it feels like, because it is, last time we spoke, you had mentioned so much of the team, of course, is longtime Crash fans, lifelong Crash fans. And so to be able to really put this game in the context of what Crash's story is, it's not just, here's another, X number of levels. Here's why this journey matters to the, to pick up from that original Crash trilogy.
Exactly. Yeah, this is actually, to tie it back into that original Crash trilogy for us, we kind of had this general idea of, what if there was an amount of time in between, Crash going through the Evolvo Ray before failing out of the Cortex Vortex? because it's kind of a hard cut in that opening cutscene of the original Crash game, and so you don't know if there
Yeah.
was some time in there. And so what this is if there was an amount of time in between that evolving process and Cortex Vortex, where Cortex is really kind of bullish on the idea that Crash is going to be, his next great general. And so, from a storytelling perspective, it was really fun for us to come up with some fun lines and some fun audio for Cortex and some of the other scientists, where they're really positive on Crash's progress and they're really excited to see what he could become, without knowing that he'll actually be their future nemesis.
I love that, because it is, as someone who's been a fan of the franchise since that original trilogy, it's great to see sort of the twists of modern and retro that the team really seems to be bringing to this. And one of those things that I want to talk about, because everything that I've loved that I've seen about the game really comes down to so many great presentation notes. And one of those big things is, of course, that was something revealed a few weeks back, but the inverted mode, which is sort of the mirror mode of the game. For those who may not have seen that initial reveal, or for people looking for a little bit more, can you sort of give me just like a brief overview of how inverted mode plays into the rest of Crash 4?
Sure, absolutely. So inverted mode is what we call our souped up take on mirror mode, but it's not just flipping the screen and having that mirroring. It's also introducing these brand new kind of visual aspects and presentational aspects to each of our dimensions. And so in one, you could be going in what was it, the what we call the neon wastelands, or the hazardous wastes, with a crazy neon filter, and so everything's black and white and it looks like it's lit up by neon, and the light will actually fade if you take too long going to the next checkpoint. Or we have one that looks like you're underwater, and we're actually making it feel more like you're underwater. And so some of these have really fun gameplay altering effects. Some of them are purely visual or really excitingly visual, like one where you're in a black and white world and you're spinning, and spinning causes paint to spill out and paint the world. So this inverted mode is something that players will unlock part of the way through their journey in the game, and it allows players, once they've beaten the level, to access the level in this new mode with a unique feel, and also just more goals and challenges for them to take on.
I love it, because it's there's this wonderful balance of wanting to bring people into the Crash world, but also to really give that level of, I think, depth that Crash longtime fans expect, but also that difficulty that fans expect. And there's just such a wide breadth of stuff that you and the team have shown off. It's been so incredibly rewarding as a fan to see, like, oh, there's this new layer, there's this new layer. It really does feel like this incredible full package for celebrating Crash's history and his future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was very important for us to have kind of this foundational aspect of that original trilogy of games, and that kind of unique, what we call that perspective shifting platforming, that's really tied to the execution of skill and precision. But to take that as our foundation, and then just build on it and continue to iterate and continue to bring in new aspects, from quality of life things of our modern and retro modes, which allow you to, if you want, play where if you die, you always come back at a checkpoint versus having to need to earn lives, to just additional things for players to do to grow in that skill. Because the more you play this game, the better you get. The more efficient you get. The way that you see we have a death tracker now, and you see that thing shrink the more you play these levels. And then with inverted mode, we said we wanted something that played against that. We wanted something that took your muscle memory and threw it out the window and gave you a whole new fresh experience. And so from a new player coming in, it's a really welcoming start to joining in the franchise. But then for that classic player, we've got some devious things, like these flashback tapes are just crazy, and the fact that you have to get to access them without even dying is just another layer.
Yeah, and as you were saying, sort of as we wrap up, it both speaks to the death routes that were there in the original trilogy that definitely drove me crazy sometimes, especially when I was younger, but also the chance to have a new version of that here really does speak to, I think, sort of what this game is aiming to deliver, which I love seeing so much. as we sort of wrap up, I did quickly want to bring up, of course, because we've seen now Neocortex and Dingodile as other playable characters. And I was just sort of wondering on sort of a broad level, the team's approach to these new characters, because I got a chance to go hands-on with the Cortex level from the preview version of the game a few weeks back. And what I loved was I felt at first, I was like, oh no, this doesn't play like Crash. I'm going to have to rework my whole brain. And then it was like, oh, I could see a whole spin-off around the way Cortex plays. It felt like very well thought through. It felt very fun in its own right, but also fresh and unique and not just sort of a copy of what Crash was.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. For us, when making these alternate heroes, the way that players are going to get access to them is that as they play through the adventure, there will be a level introducing kind of them to this character like Cortex and Dingo that will teach them how these characters play. And then from that point on, they'll actually interact with them in optional levels where these characters will be in what we call timeline levels, where you see how their parallel stories interact with Crash and Coco's adventure. And for us, when developing these, what we wanted to do was make sure that they were all compelling in their own right. They have some kind of core fundamentals. Like, we didn't want to, make Dingodile into a 3D, action adventure game. They have some core, foundational elements of a Crash game, but then we wanted to give them their kind of unique play styles, their unique focus. And so for Cortex, he's a bit more puzzly, right? He's about figuring out where to go, how to change enemies, how to interact with them. And then for Dingo, he's kind of our demolitions expert. He's all about breaking through stuff. He's picking up TNT barrels with his vacuum can and launching them at enemies. He's smashing through crates. He's a big boy, so he's slamming through things as he goes, as opposed to kind of having more of a finesse style of play than Crash. So it's been a lot of fun for us and for the team, not only to come up with the movesets for these, but then also just reinvent kind of how we develop levels for them and to come up with really fun, new, and unique interactions for these characters.
Yeah, the Cortex level was such a fresh surprise, and I loved getting the handle of him. And so I'm very excited to see how him and Dingodile and how this all factors into the full campaign really plays out, because I'm very excited to see that full package. Before we do wrap up, I briefly did want to have to ask, of course, I know the game's just, a couple months now away from launch, a little over a month. Is there enough time to put a John Carpenter reference in there now that we know he is looking forward to Crash Bandicoot 4?
I have never been happier about anything on the internet ever. For
context, for those who may not know, John Carpenter was recently giving an interview and mentioned he can't wait to play Crash Bandicoot 4, and I was delighted by that as a John Carpenter fan. And I saw you tweet about it too, so I had to mention it was a delightful congruence or confluence of things I would not expect to come together.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, as just a big fan and a big, horror nerd, it just brought a warmth to my heart. And honestly, seeing just the outpouring of how excited people are about this game has just been such an uplift to the team. Really, it's been a great project, and we can't wait to get it in people's hands, especially John Carpenter's.
Especially his. And of course, I can't wait to play, and we're not that far off because Crash Bandicoot 4 is coming to PS4 and Xbox One on October 2nd. So close, I can't believe it. But thank you, Lou, so much for taking the time to speak with me. Can't wait to see more of the game, and thank you for showing off the newest bit of the Crash 4 puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.